Hey, Captain Obvious here. Welcome to Geeks for Dummies, where I talk about different things that people can geek out about, from the very well-known to the relatively obscure. This time, we are discussing anime. Like it or not, and believe me, there are people on both sides of that audience, anime is one of the most misunderstood forms of media out there today. There are blogs dedicated to it, or even specific shows, and in some more obsessed cases, characters. More on that later. For now, welcome to Geeks for Dummies, Anime, a misunderstood media. Admittedly, there are titles that I do like, and I have watched, and some of them I even do own to this day. But there is also a lot of crap out there on today's market. When these shows are made in Japan, some of them are made for a general audience, whereas some of them are made for a specific target audience. And when they're ported over here to the US, they're either very successful or they completely miss the mark. When I say it's a misunderstood media, I more or less mean that when it's brought up in conversation amongst people who don't necessarily watch it, you get one of two responses. Typically, you might get a couple others here and there, but these are the main two. You get somebody that goes, "Oh, those cartoons from Japan?" Or, "Isn't that ultra-violent stuff?" Yes and yes. They wouldn't be wrong, but it's not exclusively one or the other, or both. Sure, some titles are ported over here to the US for the intention of being like on Saturday morning cartoons or just a children's cartoon in general. Albeit they might be edited and changed for content, like characters could have their skin color changed, or even names can change. And even some of the in-jokes that the Japanese people and their culture have can be completely changed from, like, instead of the characters eating rice balls, they say, "Oh, we're eating jelly donuts." And then there is the latter of the two, which during the mid to late 90s on late night television, or even on the notorious Preview channel, there was a commercial that had marketed anime as the next big thing in ultra-violent science fiction or fantasy or anything like that, but it was marketed as adult. They put the sexual promiscuity out there. They used a lot of the double entendre. They made it very suggestive, and they proudly proclaimed that it was violent. Here in the West, typically when something is animated, it is intended for a child audience or even family viewing. But there are rare occasions, such as Heavy Metal and its sequel, Heavy Metal 2000, that do happen to be animation, but they had intended it to be for adults. So we can't really say, "Oh, animation's just for children," because obviously with even American titles that are geared towards adults, we don't have much room to talk. My first exposure to anime was a show called Robotech, which is the American working title for 3 different anime shows that in Japan had absolutely nothing to do with one another. They all took place in different locales, completely different timelines, completely different backstories, so on and so forth. But when they came here, and they were put together by Harmony Gold, they were fused together in a story that was very interesting. I do have my favorite of all 3 different parts, and that would be the first part, the Macross Saga. One thing that kept me glued was the potential that a main character could in fact die. You spent a lot of time watching the show, you get invested in the characters, you're curious to see what's going to happen next, you see love triangles unfold, and the awkwardness of the characters, you sit there and think, wow, that, you know, I can relate to that. And then one of them nearly loses his life, and an episode or two later, another character that you've grown to know, who's kind of like a mentor, is gone. He's killed. And for a first-time viewer, that gives you the impression that all bets are off, and it keeps you glued. And it kept me glued when I saw it. And when it came back in the late 90s, I watched it again, and I loved it, you know. Now, as far as the fan base goes, you have the casual watcher that can take it or leave it, or you have what some Americans call otakus, or the hardcore fans. Now, otakus, there's nothing necessarily wrong with them. They do tend to like shows a lot. They're the ones that dedicate entire blogs to their favorite shows, and in some extreme cases, their favorite characters. And that's fine. You know, it's okay. You know, they even take the time to learn some Japanese mannerisms and learn a little bit of the culture, which I think being cultured is just fine. I think it's something healthy. Now, depending on who you talk to, otaku can definitely have a different meaning. Here in the States, it is a dedicated fan to anime. In Japan, it is very negative. It is basically an obsessed loser who borderlines on being homicidal. So depending on who you talk to, whether they be American or Japanese, might change the impact of the conversation. As far as people who have never really watched the media, if they want to get into it, I would strongly suggest that you go in with the mindset, don't think of it as cartoons, and don't think of it as ultra-violent. Yes, there are titles that do cater to one or the other, but just thinking of it solitarily as either one, it's not going to work. Instead, I would say approach it like watching any other form of media, whether it be a movie or television show, and just think it's another art form. You know, kind of like they have live-action TV series. Well, think of it along those lines, except in this case it's animated. You know, if you don't want ultra-violent, I would recommend the Miyazaki collection. It is currently being released by Disney. Very worth a watch. Very family-oriented. I myself have collected some of them over time, and it is currently in the collection that we have here. But if you're looking for something a little more serious, but still not ultra-violent, it's going to have violence. But I would recommend Shinro, the Wolf Brigade. It does take a little bit of patience. It's not something you can just sit down and just work your way through. You do have to kind of think about it. But it has very serious undertones. It's not meant for kids. So, as I said, just approach it as it's another method of storytelling. But that's it at a glance. Like it or not, anime is one of those things that people can geek out about. You know, I'm not going to condemn it. I'm not going to say, hey, go check it out. But I would like to say at least give it a try. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you liked it, please like the video. If you really enjoyed it, please share it. That would be greatly appreciated. In the meantime, this is Captain Obvious, signing off.